That's right. It's the Walter Bosley channel. Cracking open a nice refreshing drink while you all pile in for another exciting episode. And this actually is a real cool one among several real cool ones we've had lately. Because my guest, believe it or not, my guest is a guy we've written a book together, and we have actually only ever met face to face one time. And that was in, of all interesting places, Glacier National Park, which you Sescherie fans should know the significance of that among many. Anyway, before we get to that today, I just wanted to welcome you all and let you know that I have crossed a big bridge. I reconsidered having the printed books on Amazon because, well, the deal is different now. So guess what? I am, in increments, putting the publishing catalog, nonfiction and soon fiction, some of the fiction's already up there, onto Amazon. We're talking, it's still print on demand, okay? But you can go to Amazon.com now and buy the books new. Okay, and they'll print them up and it'll get shipped out the same way. But you can access them on Amazon. And here's the funny thing. You will find some of these same books of mine available as used copies. And a brand new copy is much cheaper than what the used copies were going for. So I'm sure that's going to make some folks not happy when they see a new one. But the other thing is, they're all matte covers. I finally got around to changing all the covers to matte finish. So there you go. That just looks so much nicer. And look at that. That's an ISBN zebra label, as we call them. And, of course, zebra label inside there. The Esoteric Napoleon Volume 1 is up at Amazon.com. New printed copy you can get, and it looks fantastic. And all of them are matte finish now. Here is Secret Missions 2, The Lost Expedition of Sir Richard Francis Burton. Also, there's the zebra label. Available, hey, not just Amazon.com, but BarnesandNoble.com. Now, listen, if you really care about what goes on here at the Walter Bosley channel and you care about what I publish, you'll remember that you can go to lostcontinentlibrary.com and you'll be able to, reach all of these books through, link to Amazon and the link to barnesandnoble.com. Now, Empire of the Wheel 1 is already up. I think 2 and 3 are up also. But Empire of the Wheel 1, also in a matte finish, available now through Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. So I'm real excited about that. It was time to take the leap. As you know, I just reached 20 years as a publisher, small press, micro press, really. And it was time to, leap forward into the next 20 years. And so that is including what you're seeing here at the Walter Bosley channel. Things have really started to look real sharp with the new producer, Malia Grimm, and getting the books to a more expanded reach, to a greater audience. Just all part of it. Plus, a little bit of media development, which my guest and I are going to discuss here in a few moments. So, let's see. We covered that. Also, I want to remind you, the Independent Broadcast Network, okay? That's where I have a weekly radio show now. Tuesday nights, 9 p.m. to midnight Pacific Standard Time. Listen to it live on those nights, and then it shows up recorded, archived. You can get that through Spreaker, okay? And that's called Lost Horizons with Walter Bosley. Now, it's not going to be, when you go over there, it's not just a repeat of what you get here. And that's on purpose. I don't want it to be just, exactly like what you see here. I want it to be something a little bit different in what I talk about and how I present. It's audio. Okay, so I can just focus on my thoughts and what I'm communicating. So go over there. I've done 2 episodes. The 3rd episode is coming up this Tuesday night, 9 p.m. to midnight Pacific Standard Time at Independent Broadcast Network. So all sorts of cool stuff happening here. And anyway, it's time for me to bring in my guest. Folks, I'm telling you, this is exciting. My co-author on Empire of the Wheel 1, and he really brought it up to a level, because this is a guy with some serious credentials, and he's got some fantastic books of his own, one of which, Secret Agent 666, was how I came to ask him to write Empire of the Wheel 1 with me, because it was such an incredible source of knowledge relative to Aleister Crowley and what I was seeing with the Empire of the Wheel investigation, that he was just providing me with an incredible amount of data that it was natural for us to bring that book to you together. So I'm going to bring Rick Spence. Hey, Rick, how's it going? Can you hear me? Is the audio?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. Well, welcome to the Walter Bosley channel. This is a long time coming, I think.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So, as I was telling them, and they've heard me talk about it, we have Empire of the Wheel in TV development, as we've had now for, 4 years, I think?
It's been going on for a while.
Yeah, as these things do.
Yes.
And our producer, Melissa Tittle, by the way, I don't know if you've been following her accomplishments lately, but she did a film titled Code 12. And it's an interesting kind of documentary look at what appears to be some type of geomantic code spread across North America and, out into the world. And anyway, her film is winning awards at festivals. She's on the festival circuit right now with it. Have you heard of it yet?
Code 12? No.
Yeah.
Not.
I will send you the trailer, the link to the trailer. So I think you'll find it really interesting. I'm in it. In the beginning, she flew me out to Denver and shot my part. And our friend Seshari, of course, who did data for our book, Empire of the Wheel 1, he provided her a similar type of analysis. So it's pretty interesting. But as we said, it's been going on a while, a few years, because these things take that long. But Rick and I are looking at, we're real close to both some a documentary series based upon Empire of the Wheel stuff, and of course the dramatic series. That's the big one. So that's
where there will be an actor portraying you.
Yeah, there might be. It might be both of us.
Okay.
It gets into that. I think the way her vision works currently is it gets into that in a 3rd season. Gets into what we were doing in the present, so to speak. That now 13 years ago. So Rick, before we get too far into that, what is your latest project? I've been seeing you out there on various, documentary series and such. What's the latest?
Well, the latest thing that I did.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the work I've done the last few years has been for an outfit which has generally been known as the Great Courses. Mm-hmm. They have rebranded themselves as Wondrium. which can get a little confusing because there's Wondrium and there's the Great Courses, and they're pretty much the same thing. Mm-hmm. Although Wondrium goes off into some directions that Great Courses wouldn't, maybe. So the last thing I did for them, I did the Real History Secret Societies a couple of years back. I did another shorter 12-episode series called Crimes of the Century, which is basically a survey of modern murder cases, which includes some of your favorites. It's got Manson, it's got the Zodiac, but then there's also the assassination of Trotsky and a couple of murderous maid sisters in France in the 1930s, among other things. Oh, and the assassination of Franz. But then just before Christmas this year, we came out with Secrets of the Occult, which is 24 episodes that would tell you, I don't know, not everything you would want to know about the occult, because that's impossible, isn't it? But I try to cover the waterfront to give some sort of background of what we're talking about when that term is used, and all the endless amount of stuff that you can put into that category, including Christmas. Okay, there's one whole episode where I completely ruined the entire Christmas tree story by explaining that it's all an occult ritual. So, and
I've been accused of that.
We'll probably be doing some more work for them. We'll see. We'll know that goes. And in addition to that, there are also a couple of sort of series. There's a documentary that people in UK are trying to put together on, guess who? Aleister Crowley. And I'm a contributor to that, and that's
cool.
Again, it's out there somewhere in development limbo. So maybe something will come of that.
Yeah.
And there are various other sort of things that I get the itch to do every now and then. And we'll see. It's always a speculative venture to see who else.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Something interests you or it interests me. And one of the things I found out is that my interests don't always coincide with the interests of the wider world. But you try to find that situation where what you have can have some kind of broader appeal. Who would pay money to subscribe to watch that? That's what it comes down to.
Right. Speaking of Crowley and media things, a few years ago there was this series. They only did 2 seasons, Strange Angel, about Jack Parsons. Did you see that one?
I did.
I thought that was interesting, and it was very frustrating where they just chose to end it with Hubbard showing up at the door in Pasadena. It's like, if there was ever a show screaming for the next season, that was it.
Yeah, I mean, there were lots of. It's I usually squirm through these things where. See, this is one of the reasons why you really shouldn't know a lot about things, because that then someone else's interpretation kind of ruins it for you.
Mm-hmm.
And am I the type of guy that will sit through a war movie and point out that that's not a T-34 tank? No, that's the wrong one. I was once put in place by my wife, who said that, who besides you and 6 other people in the world would know or care about that? You got it. But it's either right or wrong. Strange Angel was. I wish it could have lived up to all of it. Could have.
Right. True.
But at least somebody tried.
Yeah, at least somebody attempted to bring the story of Jack Parsons to an audience dramatically, and hopefully that will inspire more projects. And we'll get that one that was more comprehensive and more accurate. Of course, but it was. I wonder how much perhaps Scientology played a role in making sure that they didn't go any further once Hubbard showed up at the doorstep. You
mean that the whole thing stopped dead as soon as L. Ron entered? Yeah.
That seems suspicious a little bit there, but it was definitely interesting, and I would like to see more on that. Now, there was last autumn when I was looking to do an episode on one of the topics we're going to discuss a little bit today. I happened upon the video you did. We're talking about the Order of the Green Dragon, and I thought, oh wow, this intrigued me, and here's Rick. He's done a thing on that, so that's why I wanted to bring you on. One of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on to talk about this Order of the Green Dragon, because I'm intrigued with these. With situations like that. I'm presently doing some research on the pulp author Talbot Mundy, and of course he's famous for his novel The Nine Unknown, which Powles and Berger in The Morning of the Magicians claim dates back to Ashika, but of course they don't list their source on that. And it's all in the murky, misty, early 20th century kind of thing, and that's kind of how I view the Order of the Green Dragon. So I thought it would be interesting to, pick your brain on that. And have you learned any more about them or heard any more about them? Anything new since you did that Wondrium report?
I think I can't remember whether I mentioned it in that episode.
Mm-hmm.
There's, one of the books that relates to it is the book I know you mentioned in the episode that you did on the Green Dragon a little while back. The Seven Heads of the Green Dragon. It's in French. The Sept Têtes du Dragon Vert. That's a 1933 book, kind of a pulp novel that was published in France by a pseudonym, an author called himself Teddy Legrand. There was no such guy. There were just different people who used that as a pen name. And there's always been this ongoing question about who the Teddy Legrand who wrote The Seven Heads of the Green Dragon actually was. And there's one French writer by the name of Jean de Grave. Could have been him. Maybe more likely, I know someone that you mentioned was Pierre Mariel, who seems to tick all the boxes. Mariel was a writer with an interest in the occult. He also had connections to the French intelligence service. He was also very much involved in looking at sort of current mysteries, current as of the late 1920s, early 1930s. And so it could have been him, but I think about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe more recently than that, there's been a new edition of Seven Heads of the Green Dragon that was published by an outfit in France called Energia. It's run by a guy by the name of Jim Fraisse, Fraisse. He's French, but his name is Jim. And so he's been republishing some of these works, and his contention, went through kind of an interesting email exchange, is that the actual author is another Frenchman with ties to the intelligence service, spied during World War I, then becomes a sensationalist journalist, goes to Germany to cover the rise of the Nazis, doesn't like the Nazis, and is one of those people who early on is sort of warning these guys are potentially trouble.
Yeah.
And his name is a mouthful. His name is Javier de Hautecloque. Okay, Hautecloque is what his name looks like. Hautecloque. There you go.
Hautecloque.
Yeah.
Hautecloque.
Javier de Hautecloque is, I'm not absolutely convinced of anything about the Green Dragon, but I say that Hautecloque probably is the most likely author, partly because one of the things that was mentioned by the publishers of the original book was that Teddy Legrand, or whoever Teddy Legrand was, had died, had essentially been murdered through poison not long after the book was published, around 1935. And Javier de Hautecloque makes a trip back to Germany, a kind of secret mission. There you go, a secret mission into Germany to talk with some German officers who were not too keen on Hitler, and possibly at the behest of the French military intelligence service. He went there and he was poisoned and came back to France and died. So Hauptklot's death matches the death that is attributed to Teddy Legrand, or maybe the publishers just decided they would combine those two things together. I mean, in a way, that's something about not just the book Seven Heads of the Green Dragon, but the whole mythos surrounding this society. One of the reasons it interests me in a way is because it's one of those things that really can't be solved,
right,
to any absolute degree.
Right.
When you're talking about the Green Dragon Society, you're talking about one of those things that's, well, it exists, probably. I mean, there seems to be some actual people making references to it, but it's never clear as to what it is,
right,
who it's affiliated with, or what it wants, and the whole thing about seven heads of the Green Dragon is that whoever the author was, or were they just roping that into an otherwise good yarn? No,
right.
Is it a pot boiler story? That's all it is, and they're combining bits and elements of things that people might have heard of. Except that the Green Dragon is a pretty rare item. I don't know whether that in and of itself was likely to draw in too many people. The previous, I said that Seven Heads of the Green Dragon was in some ways a continuation of a series of pulp novels, of French pulp novels that had been done in the 1920s by a guy named Charles Lucietto. And Charles Lucietto, well, guess what his background was? French intelligence in World War I. All of these guys somehow are tied to that. Who then again became a writer and journalist. But he's the guy who came up with this character you mentioned of James Nobody. One of
Yes.
the central characters in Seven Heads, and one of the central characters in Lucietto's earlier novels is this English spy, James Nobody, which I think you suggested oddly like it might have had something to do with James Bond. I think you're right. But that's a little mystery in and of itself. But Lucietto died at the end of the 1920s. I don't think he was poisoned, but he shuffled off his mortal coil. So that's why there was this kind of changing of the guard, and you simply moved Teddy Legrand as the pseudonym for one person to another. But Lucietto's stuff was a little bit more standard pot boil. I mean, the best of those stories to me is Red Virgin of the Kremlin.
Oh, that's an intriguing title.
But that's all about spies and Bolshevik Russia and this
right.
Type of,
yeah.
And it's a different. There's a very different feel to those books than there is to the later Seven Heads of the Green Dragon. So you can clearly tell there's someone else who's writing it, and it's just kind of an odd thing to title a book. I mean, that's not really a sort of public discourse. How many potential readers out there had ever heard of this?
Right.
So there's the conundrum right there. Is this just a story? Is it nothing more than a French pulp story that was trying to draw upon sensational, weird elements from the current news, things that were going on, the rise of the Nazis, and or is it actually delivering some kind of real information? The opposite end of that is where there were those who would argue that this is actually people within the French intelligence service that are using these novels to leak information into the public domain.
Yeah. Well, when you consider particularly the period of time we're talking about, that late 20s going into the 30s, that's the rise of Nazi Germany and French intelligence. What comes to my mind is I wonder if this was some type of fictional camouflaged reference to the old Junkers Prussian Society of Lizards in German history, which that very murky, shadowy group was involved in the intrigues that the Junkers, who in medieval times started calling themselves Prussian, they really just appropriated, as we say today, that title. They eliminated the real Prussian culture, and they inserted their brand of it into the same region, and what we know as Prussian in both culture and in philosophical outlook, that very what we would call, fascist way of approaching life and everything you do. The Society of Lizards was very much involved in that, and I'm still learning about them, more about them. But green dragon, lizard. I just that's a thread that I definitely think is worth pulling. Again, because you consider the context of the history at that time, I have to wonder.
Well, you've got, references to green show up some kind of interesting places.
Mm-hmm.
So there was, and when you're talking about the Society of Lizards, is there a connection between that and something called the Holy Fame, the Vehme, Vehme, the Fame?
I would have to look again, but there's something. My gosh, it's a word. It begins with F. It's similar, but it references a specific tactic of very public assassination, and it's something that they were very much involved with and were known for, and it was their way of using terror to control a populace. So is that similar to what you're referring to?
Well, the Holy Fame, or the Fame or the Fame-Gericht, they're different. Usually it's Vehm or Vehme.
Mm-hmm.
They were supposedly dates back to the Middle Ages and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a kind of extrajudicial court.
Yes.
Not a court that had any legal authority.
Yes.
But a kind of star chamber among the nobility, who then would sit up and they would pronounce death sentences against people.
Oh, there we go.
But their argument is that, yes, we have this actual kind of court, and the Vehme would meet and it would pronounce the doom of this individual.
Yeah.
And they would be struck down. So yeah, I think we're talking about this.
And here's I think the best evidence for it. Anyone who's studied linguistics, that the F and the V are often interchangeable. The F, the V, one comes from the other. So I think we're definitely talking about the same body, so to speak. And the Society of Lizards was very much connected to that.
And that's one of the things you have to watch for in all of this stuff. When you go hunting for murky organizations, you have to look at how they're not necessarily the names or the terminologies that we'll use.
Right.
But if you find what appear to be two different groups, but they really seem, when you look close, to be doing exactly the same thing in the same way, for the same reasons, but they're just using a different terminology. In most cases, they are the same thing. Duck walks like a duck. It's probably a duck. And so that's one way to nefarious conspiracies.
In the argument for instance, as Joseph Farrell puts forth, and I think there's a lot to it to consider in the post-Operation Paperclip United States of America. The assassination of JFK within Farrell's context of a post-war Nazi international, the assassination of JFK has all the earmarks of the Femme that we're talking about here, and how they would do things dating back to the Middle Ages. Once they had determined someone had to go, they would make it very public, the execution, the elimination of who had to go. And so it's it would appear that it's still alive and well in our times and in our world. That's for sure. Now in Asia, is there any? Is there more evidence, I wonder, connected to European sources about the Green Dragon than there actually is in Asian sources?
Well, to give you one Asian source, one of the few things that to me is a kind of solid piece of evidence that anything called the Green Dragon Society actually existed is really this kind of casual statement by a woman. I'm going to butcher her name here, but it's Chen Cheju, who was one of Chiang Kai-shek's wives. Not the Madam Chiang Kai-shek that you generally see in newsreels, but she was his. I think technically she was a concubine, but at any rate, she, writing her memoirs and talking about her life with Chiang, as he's coming to power in the 1920s, she mentions the fact that her husband Chiang Kai-shek was thinking of setting up like this secret intelligence organization that would be modeled on the Japanese Black and Green Dragon societies. So that's another thing. There is, without any question, a Japanese secret society called the Black Dragon Society.
Mm-hmm.
So what she did, the reason why I think that statement is important is that here you have someone who has no particular axe to grind about this. So Chen Shiju isn't trying to, this is just something she's mentioning that's of no particular consequence to her. So she's not trying to promote the idea of the Green Dragon or refute it. She just says that my husband was thinking about setting up this group and he was going to model it on these two things. Mm-hmm. And what's important here is that because she's mentioning on the Black and Green Dragon societies, she's not confusing the Green Dragons with the Black Dragons. In other words, she's not just giving it a different color. She's saying that these are two different things. And they're two different things that my husband, Chiang Kai-shek, future General of China, had some kind of dealings with. And that to me is that, if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't necessarily even put it into the realm of something that exists. It would always be something that's just kind of rumored to exist. But I think it makes the one kind of definite statement about it. On the other hand, somebody else who mentions it, who picked that up later, is the writer Trevor Ravenscroft. Mm-hmm. The guy then wrote a book, became kind of a big hit, on the weird reading scene, The Spear of Destiny. This is the whole thing about Hitler gets his hands on the Spear of Longinus. So you know how that story goes. Mm-hmm. And there really is a spear, probably isn't a Roman spear, but there is this thing in the Hofburg in Vienna, which has that kind of story, which is attached to it. And Hitler did have it under his authority for a while, but then sort of George Patton. But it sort of passed from one hand to another. But The Spear of Destiny is essentially the book. I think it came out in the early 70s. I think I've got that right there. About 10 years after Pauls and Bergier's Morning of the Magician.
Right.
And the thing about Morning of the Magicians is that it mentions a kind of secretive Asian society, but it never actually names the Green Dragon Society.
Right.
That comes up, and the thing with Ravenscroft, which paints the whole theory in Ravenscroft, or I guess the whole story put forward, is that Hitler was essentially an evil magician in the pawn of diabolical forces.
Yeah.
And, which is, a story that really has legs to it, and may be true to one extent or another. But personally, I wouldn't take Trevor Ravenscroft's words for it because I can't. Because where did he get his information from?
Right.
Where did he get it? Well, from his mentor, a follower of a German occultist by the name of Rudolf Steiner. Mm-hmm. So if you run or something called anthroposophy, which is a difficult word to say. Anthroposophy.
Yeah, we're getting into Blavatsky territory.
Yeah, but that's just a ripoff of Blavatsky. So Rudolf Steiner, I'm sure he would sue me if he was alive, but he's dead. And anyway, but I'd be right anyway. So Trevor Ravenscroft is a follower of Rudolf Steiner. Rudolf Steiner had a real, he didn't like the Nazis either. And essentially, when it came down, what he later admitted was that he channeled the whole book from the ghost of his mentor. Right. And I'm not, kind of poo-pooing the whole idea of channeling. I'm not poo-pooing the concept of ghosts. I am saying that when it comes to terms of historical research, I just got to have something more than that. Okay, I
Sure.
handled it from the spirit of my dead mentor. Is just, yeah, I can't work with that.
Well, the way I handle it, Rick, is like you. I don't dismiss or dispose of the weirder information that comes from the more esoteric sources. What I do is I just put it in a different stack, and I will use it in my fiction. I will tell people, look, read my fiction, because in there you'll see me refer to or use things that, I stumbled into during my nonfiction research, but that stuff has no place in, a nonfiction book. So, that way I'm not just tossing it out of hand, because sometimes that stuff can lead to what I've experienced. It can lead to other information that does have more of a referential pedigree, so to speak, right? So that's why I don't dismiss it, but like you just can't use it in certain ways.
Well, even if I come really close to dismissing it, even if every fiber of my body going, this is BS,
Mm-hmm.
still, you put it over into the probably BS, but I'm not entirely sure pile,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you wait and see whether something comes up that connects it. Well, here's a case. I said that there is Chiang Kai-shek's wife, for no particular reason, mentions the Green Dragon Society. She grounds it in some sort of actual time and place.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't think, wherever Trevor Ravenscroft got his information from, I'm pretty sure he never read her very obscure memoir. So he couldn't have gotten his reference to the Green Dragon Society there.
Mm-hmm.
So in mentioning the Green Dragon Society, he had to have gotten that information from somewhere else. Or I don't know, maybe he did get it from a ghost, but the ghost had to get it from somewhere, right?
Right. Yeah.
Which means that even though it's one of those things, even though 99% of something may be BS, there may still be that 1% which will resonate with other material. And the thing to consider is just, how did that whole term enter that story?
Mm-hmm.
Where did he pick up an awareness of the Green Dragon? Why does it keep popping up again and again and again? And that's where I then all those have little values, that they're another kind of reference point. This is another sort of, it's a little signal here, sort of coming up with the same message as the other one did.
Mm-hmm.
It still leaves us that same question. I think there was that. Let's put it this way: I'm pretty sure enough that would I bet the whole farm on it? Maybe not, but I'd wager as much as I felt comfortable with that the Green Dragon Society is real. It had some existence. Maybe it still does.
What about mention now? I trying to remember if this purely comes from which I put up here on the screen. I happen to have Powell and Berger right here, Morning of the Magicians, and I think you'll agree, a very frustrating book because of this whole issue of great info, where'd you guys get it? And, it's nowhere to be found. But I can't remember if it's just this book or if Ravenscroft references this book, but the whole thing about the mysterious Tibetans with the green gloves.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's a connection there, supposed to be.
You'll run across this story in any number of sources, and it's in the fall of Berlin, and sometimes it's in the Reichstag itself. In the very last battles of the war, the Russians break into the place and they find all of these, dead Tibetans in SS uniforms lying among the rubble.
In a circle too, in some versions. Yeah.
There are all kinds of questions there. How did they know they were Tibetans?
Yeah.
Is there? You don't have a T on the forehead. Would it be possible in those circumstances to immediately you could argue, well, these guys are East Asians, yes, but
sure,
exactly from where? So that seems to be. I've tried to hunt down the origins of that story, and I think that's just it's a nice story. But the thing is that there was a guy in Berlin in the late 20s and early 30s, just as the Nazis, literally as the Nazis are coming to power, who was known, at least in Berlin circles, as the man with the green gloves.
Mm-hmm.
And but he was not a Tibetan.
Mm-hmm.
He has no known connection to the Green Dragon Society. He was a guy by the name of Jan Erik Hanusson. He was a stage. He was a stage psychic,
Mm-hmm.
mind reader. When he branched out into he was your kind of all around Mr. Occult. I mean, you name it, prophesying what was going to happen next, reading the stars, reading your palm. Hanusson was in this, and he was a big name. So
He was like a Cagliostro almost, right?
Literally, there you got it. He was the Count Cagliostro of Weimar. Okay, so you get your Weimar Berlin and all of its cabaret decadence, all of the pre-Nazi decadence. And he's a good example of that because he was this very flamboyant. Half the people in Berlin thought he was a complete charlatan. The other half, or at least paying attention to him, thought that he was a great seer and a man with huge psychic gifts. In reality, he was probably a combination of those things.
Mm-hmm.
But
real quick, speaking, since you mentioned Berlin during the Weimar Republic, you've probably seen it. I recommend everybody. There's an ongoing German-produced series titled Babylon Berlin that runs on Netflix, and you gotta watch that, folks, because it's getting it's with each season, it's moving closer to some of this weird stuff that we're talking about. But yeah, it's a very good dramatic depiction of this era and kind of the context.
Yes, I would highly endorse Babylon Berlin. And but Hanusson was a big draw. He played in the big theaters in Berlin. He had a whole sort of like weekly horoscope that was read. I don't know by 2 million people in Germany. And he became sort of buddies with the Nazis because he would predict their electoral successes. And he was also the fellow who predicted that Hitler will indeed become Chancellor of Germany. Might even have picked January, I'm not too sure. And it happened. He met Hitler, so he gets to know some of the brown shirt big shots in Berlin, and he eventually, in the summer of 1932, is actually introduced to Hitler. They meet on at least, probably 3 or 4 different occasions. Now, you get some stories that he actually coached Hitler as to how to do all of his public speaking, except that Hitler already had been doing public speaking for quite a while. He was already,
sure, yeah.
But there is this connection between the two, and Hitler does seem to some degree sort of fall under this guy's spell. He even predicted, and by the way, in Berlin, he also has this nightclub, this occult themed nightclub, very exclusive place, kind of the Viper Room for Weimar weirdos, and it's called the Palace of the Occult.
Oh wow!
It was actually his apartment, and then he took over the whole floor of this building, and he turned it into the occult.
Okay,
and it had everything in it that you would imagine the Palace of the Occult to do. And that's where he would have these kind of public, public rings of sort of, he would hold sort of public seances is effectively what they were.
Sure, yeah.
And he would utter his prophecies, and it was also there that he would wear green gloves. And so this is the name got attached to him. So there is a guy with definite occult connections in Berlin who had for a period of time this title. He has nothing to do with Tibetans, but I think this is how, to some point, all things begin to mix together. It's the thing where you have sort of one current of information and another current of information, and other things are feeding it in, and then they sort of cross, and you get this hybrid. You get a hybridization of mythology, and that's again why there are elements in this that are. You trace it back, you find real people connected to those names.
Sure.
Even though it comes out of a story that has become so hybridized with other things that it no longer bears any particular resemblance to what it was. That somehow now it becomes a bunch of dead Tibetans lying in a circle in the ruins of the Reichstag. You know,
Right. And then when you throw in intelligence agencies in the mix of all this, who are always dealing with deceptive information or coded information, then it really becomes difficult to know what sources to trust on the face of them.
well, this is a point where here's what it comes down to, and this is one of my not too astute of observations of doing research in this kind of stuff
Mm-hmm.
for years. And I said one of the problems is that the people that I research are almost all pathological liars. Okay, really, I don't know what's the matter with me that draws me to these people. But I mean, I've told an occasional fib in my time, but nothing. I have not made an entire career out of lying.
Maybe it's the hope that one of the wild lies that they told you'll discover, oh my gosh, that one was true.
Yeah, I just and that's it. See, this is the huge disservice in some way that they do to ever trying to figure this out. I mean, here's what it comes down to, Walter. You know this, I know this, everybody knows this, but we don't like to talk about it too much because people lie.
Yes.
They lie, not occasionally, they lie all the time. I mean, I'm talking about big ones, little ones, lies of convenience, lies of omission. The point is that the whole sort of lubricating element, or an important ingredient, the lube of human society, is lying.
Yeah,
that's the way you get it across. So it goes on continuously.
Sure.
People lie, or they tell part of the story. They don't tell, they hold something back. Oh, well, I didn't tell you this part of it, which they changed.
Yeah.
So this has been going on since the beginning of time.
Yep.
And here we are. So when you try to, if you really try to research anything, I think anything interesting, that's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to you're going to have to have a BS meter, which is fairly well tuned. And you're going to be dealing with stuff. You're going to constantly be looking at something that could be true or it could be a lie. Because lies, lies can be much better than the truth, because the truth is often messy and inconclusive. Oh, sure.
And not as exciting. Often not as exciting.
Not as exciting. So the lie can be sexier, and you can sculpt it the way that you want to. Hence, one of my warnings. If look out to see whether it's a really good detailed story, or it's like everybody thought of all the possibilities and there's an answer for everything. That's a story. That's something which is constructed, because real events don't transpire that way.
Exactly. They do not. That's for sure. You come away with, I remember, I can't remember which book it was I did, but I stated up front, that I came away with more questions after writing the book than I had going into it. And there were some people out there that didn't like that. They're like, no, because as you know, I'm sure you've run into this, the people that have what's called the certainty fetish. They read a book, they want the author to tell them exactly what's what, and they want all the questions answered, or that writer, researcher has not done his job. And that tells me when somebody has never attempted to do what you do and what I do, because you're right. Some of these things, the true things, the real stuff, it can leave you just as perplexed. You just happen to know more data.
Yeah, I certainly have dealt with the accusation of, he doesn't, you don't come to a firm opinion on something. Okay. In other words, you don't tell me
what
I should think about this.
Yeah.
Because I was going to read this, I was supposed to read this thing, and you were supposed to tell me whether the Green Dragon Society was real or it was just a bunch of hokum. And in the end, you said, "Well, I'm not sure." Well, because that really is the only honest answer I can give you. I'm not sure. I could cherry pick I could leave out all of the other stuff and cherry pick stuff and put together a story and go, yes, this is it. This is absolutely true. But it's only true because I want it to be true, and you want to have, you want to have some kind of explanation for it.
Right.
But this is the point, I think.
Yeah. Well, speaking of subjects and people who tend to leave you with more questions than answers, let's jump over to the very interesting and really half mysterious himself, Mr. James Shelby Downard.
James Shelby Downard. Oh, man. That is hands down the weirdest thing I've ever looked at. And I've looked into some weird stuff.
Yeah.
But this is and again, it's the same type of thing. One of the questions, or one of the things that kind of drew me into it, the question as to whether or not James Shelby Downard as a person ever actually existed.
Right.
Well, there was a idea, which I'm sure is still around somewhere, that there was no James Shelby Downard. There was simply a combination of Adam Parfrey, the former publisher, Farrell House, and a couple of other people who had known Downard, whose names I will not mention because they are alive and can sue me. But anyway, they know who they are. So, but it was Parfrey and these guys, and they all got together and they cooked up this, and they took turns writing it, and they just made this stuff up, and they attribute it to this person that didn't actually exist. Well, could people do that? Hell yes, they could. So what I decided I would do is I would go, look, real people leave real traces, which means you should be able to find things like birth, death, marriage records for them.
Right.
You passed through life in America in the early 20th century and you had any prominence, your name's going to show up in the newspaper somewhere.
Oh, yeah.
So I just dug out the usual tools and started looking. And it took no time at all to establish that, yes, James Shelby Downard Jr., his daddy had the same name, which creates room for some confusion. But he was born Ardmore, Oklahoma. He went to this school during this period of time. He married this woman in Houston, Texas in 1936. They were divorced in Florida in right. Huge amount of material is there. So he was real. And the other thing that I was doing was that I was comparing what I could find in the public record and in other materials with what he described about his life. Downard wrote a kind of autobiography. It was published by Parfrey and Farrell House, and it's called The Carnivals of Life and Death.
Yes.
And I would say that for anybody who is really interested in Downard and who he is and where it came from, that is a must read. But then I will caution you by arguing that it is not an easy read.
Right.
Because you will have to go through things that just seem to be completely, out there. Completely.
Yes, indeed. It's an interesting book, to say the least.
Anyway, it reads like a child living through a Perils of Pauline cliffhanger serial with his mom trying to kill him for the free man. Anyway, but that's one of the things about it that, again, from my sort of, warped perspective, that interested, because it was just so, who writes this kind of stuff? Who would describe their life in these terms? And here's the question, which is always like, is this guy nuts? All right. Is that what I'm looking at here? Is this simply a paranoid schizophrenic writing these rambling recollections of his childhood? Or did something like this actually happen to him? Because let me put it this way, if Downard's version of reality is true, then we live in a far weirder, spookier world than you would ever want to live in. I think of it this way, an entire society and world governed by synchro mystical sorcery. I know that this is an idea that's kind of come up in some other things that you've dealt with. I've heard you mention, this concept of people goes back to the sort of basic, Crowleyan definition of magic, which I always think is, which is, again, roughly to paraphrase it, it's to create change in conformity with will, to make the world or things do what you want them to.
Yes.
The other way to put it, it comes up, it doesn't sound quite so creepy, is to manifest the reality you want.
Right.
So here's the question, I think, which has come up in some of your stuff, is that are there organized groups of people who actively seek to do that? Who actively seek to use individual or mass consciousness to sort of I can't remember who it was. Somebody once put it this way: that what they're trying to do is tip the luck plane.
I like
So,
that.
it's ordinarily the luck plane.
Mm-hmm.
The plane of probabilities should be
Right.
level, but
Sure.
if you somehow just apply a little pressure to tilt it, you could get more results in the way
Yeah.
that you
That's
wanted to do so. So, are there people who use what Crowley called magic, that is, the application of will, to try to bend reality to their ends? And are there possibly other groups of people trying to undo that bending by bending of their own? So,
sure.
and that's kind of, if you sort of break Downard's view down, his idea is that there is, now he points a lot of fingers at Freemasonry. And I want to point out that Freemasonry is a house of many rooms.
Mm-hmm.
It includes, that it is a name which has been used. Nobody owns the rights to that name, and anybody can get together and form a group and call themselves a Freemason lodge. Other lodges
Right.
might argue they're not, but they don't own the name, so they can't stop them.
Right.
So a lot of things happen and have happened in history under the broad label of Freemasonry that have
Indeed.
nothing really Freemasonry. But it's a handy organization.
Mm-hmm.
So his idea is that there's this kind of, a sorcerous Freemasonry, or people who think they are, who utilize this kind of application of magical will, and they enact this through rituals. They're very much ritual oriented.
Mm-hmm.
It connect this to the idea that I'm sure a lot of people have heard of, the Super Bowl. Everybody watches the Super Bowl, and this is why the Illuminati are always putting occult messages in all of the commercials and in the
Right.
music videos. And then you look at them, and if you know what you're looking for, they do. I mean, it's not that there isn't occult symbolism.
There is.
There is.
It's
The question
there.
is it just there because, hey, this looks cool? Okay.
Right.
Okay. It looks cool and spooky, so we'll do it. Or we actually have a plan, comrades, and we're going to put all of this stuff
Yeah.
together.
And also in the mix is, are they just messing with us?
Are they just messing with you? Okay, never underestimate the. And I have to say this, I will admit that there are times, I'm kind of sorry for it, but not really, of times when I just did things to mess with people. That is, I just messed with them for my own amusement. So,
Well, but
and
ultimately it can still be good for them because they can learn a lesson from that.
I like to think it was all a learning experience. Okay.
Exactly. You were teaching.
Teaching. One of them might be never to trust me again, but no, no, but then see, you can talk them out of that.
Yeah.
It was, I mean, that was again something that I have to say I've noticed at some point. It can be startlingly easy to convince people of things.
Yes. Well,
You know,
is it? I heard a quote recently. I forgot who I was watching, but something about what was it? Someone quoted, I think, Mark Twain, where they said it's easier to convince people of something than to convince them they were wrong or mistaken or something like that.
I can't remember it.
To convince people of a conspiracy or some crazy thing than it is to convince them they were wrong about it. That's what the quote was.
Yeah. Well, the trick is to always try to convince them of something they want to believe.
Yes, yeah, that's another way of saying I
Once you
think
kind
what
of
Twain
figure
said.
out what they want to believe, the
Hmm.
answer they'd like to hear,
Yeah,
given that, construct
you
your
you
story.
you kind of learn that trick as you have. I'm sure you know this in the intelligence world when you're dealing with sources and assets or adversaries. Exactly, you assess a person in the vetting, you assess them, and you kind of learn that sort of data. What do they want to believe? What do they want to think? And you do. I'm just saying, you do have the skills to be able to push those buttons. And I'll leave it at that. But
Yeah, no, you can. Once you find out what someone really wants or what they prefer, it becomes pretty easy to feed them the stuff that you have.
mhm.
And I mean, is that manipulative? Yeah. Okay. Advertising is manipulative.
Yeah.
So all kinds of things are. Um, but it's, I guess, it comes back into this question of, people lie. There are things that can become based on. Lies can often be better explanations for something than the truth is, because the lie can give you an answer.
Yes.
Whereas the truth doesn't. The truth just leaves you kind of floating around.
Sure.
It's unconvincing. I mean, so where do you go with this? Where do you go to try to find out what the truth is?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you keep trying. So, like I say, that's what you have to do. You
Yeah.
have to keep trying, and you have to keep, and that does entail keeping an open mind about things.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. Someone not too long ago, I was talking to them about this, and I was basically going through all of the things various things that apparently they thought I was just listing things that I didn't believe.
Oh.
Well, and which I didn't see it that way. Well, they go, well, what do you believe in? And I was thinking about it. I go, well, nothing really. I mean, in this sense, the difference between believing and knowing. All right,
Yeah,
when you know
thank you.
something, you know it. All right, I mean, you stepped off the building and you're falling. You know you are falling.
Yes.
Generally speaking, we know who our fathers and mothers are.
Yeah.
Okay? Not always, and in some cases, what we believe is wrong. But see, that's because we didn't really know it. We believed it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you believe what your mother tells you, right?
Sure.
Same way the people at the hospital believed what your mother told them. Because that's one of the things that I found, having gone through a number of times, is that when it comes down to recording the name of the child, they never ask the father. They ask the mother. The one person who can uncontrovertibly,
Yes.
physical evidence, be considered the parents, okay, because she extruded the child from her womb.
Yes. Yes.
Who delivered the sperm? Probably who she said it did, but not always.
Yeah. Right.
So, I mean, that I actually used that in class.
How many clutch their pearls over that example?
If they'd had pearls, they might have. But it's just one of those things that you thought you knew that, but really you don't. You believe it. You believe it based upon the sources you got it from.
Right.
So we believe things we don't know, and when we begin to believe things, we generally begin to base decisions on them.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I believe this is the right way to go. Therefore, your decision is that you will go in that way, and either you will become a skeleton in the desert somewhere, or you'll get to where you're going. But that was because you believed it without knowing that was the right way to go. So what it comes down to is that really we know very little.
Right.
Okay. I mean, next to nothing. We believe a lot of stuff, and we begin to base that. So I wouldn't say that I don't believe in anything, but I've become a lot more. I mean, I'll believe it in the absence of something else, of some better information. But I'm not likely to base any absolute decisions based upon that, because maybe it's true, maybe it isn't. Probably it's partly true, which means it's partly BS. And how do we know which is which?
Yeah, until we know. You can't. I was just using this example. I was talking about surveillance with someone within the context of being an investigator, a PI, and having been an expert at that when I was with Uncle Sam. There's nuances. Okay, well, you could see a car behind you. It could appear to be following you. It could also just be going the same way you're going. There's all these factors that can determine one way or the other. And the example that I was giving was to exemplify, okay, the example I just gave, it's either the person was just going the way you're going and it's nothing, or if it's not that, because of all the turns they made with you and all the circumstances and the details, they were following you, and you have to decide. Now, you'll be able to further determine, with other episodes and experiences with that individual or others following you. But it really, in that instance, it comes down to, in that moment, you have to decide, was I being followed, or was it just a coincidence and I wasn't being followed? And I, that's an either or situation like that. And you kind of just said that a moment ago with, it either is what you think it is, or there's a lot of BS there and it's not what you think it is. And when guys like us are putting forth books and reports and stuff, people are kind of, I think, hoping to either, as we said, be told what to think or get support for what they've already decided they believe. And they can get frustrated when you don't do that, when what you present questions what they believe.
Well, yeah, where you haven't confirmed. They're often looking for, and that's the issue. They're coming into the whole thing with a belief already in place, and they're looking for material that will confirm that belief. Not
confirmation bias. Yeah,
not anything that would. Well, I mean, that's the whole life. I think that's just kind of a natural view. But maybe maybe if I was to, come up with one sort of caution for researchers into this type of thing, is that don't really fall in love with a particular idea or theory.
Right.
Right. I mean, mess around with it, heavy petting, whatever it is that you want to do, but don't fall in love with it.
Right.
Because once you do that, you begin to lose any kind of objectivity, and
right.
You have to be able to you have to be able to develop kind of operative theories, but you still got to be able to say that if something comes along to show that your operative theory was wrong, that you recognize that and you go in the new direction.
Yeah, you know how to adjust. But, to bring it back to Downard, I have a question. What do you find to be the most astonishing thing attributed to him in his claims or his outlook?
Well, if you read through Downard, if you read through Carnivals of Life and Death, or there's a new volume of his writings which includes more autobiographical stuff that just came out, by the way, called, this is the title of it, Stalking the Great Whore, which is a reference to his ex-wife, which you'd have to read to get all the rest of that through. They had a complicated relationship, but this is really a sort of continuation of Downard's personal writings. They've been edited. Adam Gorightly did the heavy lifting on this by
excellent. Okay.
By going through and editing material which was, in a kind of rough state in some ways, and I think he did a great job on that. And I contributed the essay, the sort of background material I found about Downard and where he was, sort of comparing that. Well, I put it this way: Downard has a kind of this what he talks about in terms of things being governed by what he refers to as synchromystic sorcery. Okay, so again, you have these organized groups of essentially occultists at different levels who are trying to manifest a particular reality, and one of the ways they do this is through stage managing rituals. So one of the basic beliefs that he seemed to have, if I said a belief, was that from the time he was a child, in some way connected to something that probably his father had been involved in, or his parents together, he had been selected as this kind of ritual sacrifice. And that's why his account of his childhood is simply one sort of murderous assault on him after another, all of which he somehow, improbably manages to escape. But that's, the Kennedy, where he really came to the attention. Downard is sometimes called the kind of daddy of modern American conspiracy theorists, which is too much, but he's got a place in there. He's got a place at the family reunion of daddies of American conspiracy theory. Was a thing that he wrote about the Kennedy assassination called King Kill 33. You can find it out on the web now, I think. And this basically describes the assassination of JFK, not simply as a conspiracy, but as an occult, a magical conspiracy, a ritual sacrifice sacrifice, the killing of the king, which took place in particular place, 33 degree of latitude at a particular time. And all of this was designed to empower, to put more energy into manifesting this reality.
Mm-hmm.
He also thinks that the explosion of the atomic bomb at Los Alamos in July 1945 was another sort of synchro-mystical experience. So,
yeah,
and
Sesheri agrees with him on that
yeah,
in his own ways. Yeah.
and so names in Downard's world, nothing is without significance.
Right.
It's the well, and again, it's the magical way of thinking in that. In if you wanted to say the kind of magical concept of the way the everyday world works is that there are no accidents and there are no coincidences.
Right.
Everything that happens is an omen for something else.
Right.
Now, I want what people ought to try is to start thinking like that for a while. All right, from the time you wake up in the morning. Well, when you wake up in the morning, all those dreams mean something. See,
right.
Nothing is without meaning.
Right.
And therefore, every little thing and every great thing that transpires to you and around you all has meaning. It's all this kind of feedback machine, which is telling you what's going to happen or what did happen or, I don't know, what lottery ticket to buy. The type of thing, personally, I've never been able to tune into because I've never won any money playing a lottery ticket. But if you try that for a while, I tried it for a while, and it'll drive you nuts.
Yes, it will.
Because which is perhaps arguably what it's intended to do, to drive you into a completely different mental state. But it is almost exhausting. In that kind of respect. So,
and I think in this community, the conspiracy community in particular, we have people that are already doing that, and it becomes apparent when they're crossing that line into madness with it, and there's no amount of warning or trying to tell them, because that's a very dangerous line to cross, and there's people that crossed it a few miles back.
Yeah. I would say it would be a chapel perilous to go into.
Yeah.
If you begin to take every little thing that happens to you seriously, which, isn't again to argue that all these things don't have significance. But if you try to keep track of it minute by minute, you won't keep track of anything else.
No.
But that's
for sure.
That, in a way, is if Downard was indeed mad, which I think there's some reason to believe that he was.
To a degree, yeah, I would think, definitely.
Well, there were at least 2 periods of institutionalization. He was in 2 mental hospitals.
Yeah.
At least 2. And we could maybe get into that later on, but that's So, was this a guy who was judged to be mentally ill? Yes. All right. So see, right there, you could argue, well, look, all right. He was in and out of mental hospital twice. Mm-hmm. So clearly there's something wrong with him. So why are you paying any attention to what a manifest crazy person is telling you?
Right.
My only answer to that is that sometimes crazy people can tell you amazing things. Doesn't mean they're wrong. Just because someone is crazy doesn't mean that they're wrong
or lying.
See, that's the fascinating thing about the world, Walter, is that sometimes the crazy people are right.
That's right. That's right. And so it comes back to, who and what do you trust? I have to tell you that what really was a big colossal test for me of all this and grasping this was all the weird things that emerged during the research and investigation of that first Empire of the Wheel book. As you well know, the whole just the whole discussion on synchronicity is a bizarre, potentially maddening trail, because you're looking at data that is indeed there. You're looking at connections that are indeed there. You are seeing patterns that are there. It's not some type of pareidolia game in every case. And you come away, well, what do I do with this? Do I not let it go and let it drive me crazy, or do I step away once in a while and just acknowledge, okay, it's there? Kind of like Hecate. What I've discovered through all my research, you probably heard me say it, I've said it in books, I say it, at various times, but in every single one of my nonfiction books, Hecate pops up one way or another. And so, yeah, I'm really intrigued. What is this thread, this force? What is this archetype, in our psyches that is so manifest through literature, architecture, art, and just in everything? What is that actually representing? Because she's there, and particularly in King Kill 33. That was the thing that astonished me when I first read the whole thing. I'm like, oh my God, there's the whole Hecate symbolism running right through this.
Well, you asked a little while ago what I think is the most, in some way, the startling thing about Downard. People sometimes, well, so what? This guy wrote these things. What is it? Well, here's the reason why I think anybody who looks into it gets interested in it, is because for all of the crazy stuff, he's talking about, all of the improbable scenarios, all of the things. I mean, I mentioned his wife he called the Great Whore. This was, you can go through and you can kind of document the rise and fall of their whole relationship. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And yet everything that he would later write about pretty much where they were and what his wife did, he's right about this. He's right about the details of time and place. And he's not imagining people, and he's not imagining being in Florida. He was actually there, and he was in contact with these people.
Right.
But he essentially holds that she was a kind of, another conspiracy, she was a sort of monarch sex slave type of thing. She had been programmed by these pseudo-Masonic sorcerers to perform sexual rituals and rites, and she roamed the country doing this. She would basically be the kind of high priestess at synchromystic orgies, from Fort Lauderdale to San Francisco.
Wow. Kind of like a Scarlet Woman,
yes,
Crowley had,
that's
Marjorie Cameron.
Yeah. And and if you look at it, if I go through the stuff that I can sort of record about her, I mean, I find, she was a fashion model for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And, she modeled clothes. I think she had been a debutante. Her family was reasonably well-to-do in Memphis. They get mentioned in the society pages. In other words, and this is the whole thing about Downard himself. Downard moved in a kind of upper middle class, mostly Southern social circle that was exactly the kind of secret society, country club going people. Okay, that in some ways would be into this type of thing. I mean, it's if anybody was going to organize, who had access to sort of exclusivity in terms of, I mean, look, if you were going to have a synchro-mystical, diabolical sex orgy, you might do it at a country club, because you can control access.
Yeah,
to
sure.
it. And the natural people you would want to recruit or compromise into your organization were those that were influential.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, Downard wasn't really, overall a kind of nobody in society. He was someone who sort of squandered everything he had, but he came from a kind of social level where you could observe things that others couldn't. And the fascination with him comes from the fact is that for all of the absurdity in it, for all of the kind of things that you would chalk up or hoping you'd chalk up to madness, the damn stuff has this eerily familiar ring to it. It's almost as if in some cases that he's talking about stuff and it sounds crazy, but it rings some little bell.
Yeah.
You almost sort of knew this, but in some other context.
Yes.
And that's what brings up and I only hold this out as a possibility, is that, again, he may be crazy.
Yeah.
But I'm just not absolutely certain that he's totally wrong about something,
Right.
but I don't know how much. I mean, I'll admit it. I mean, do you just kind of dismiss? You just say that, look, this is a mentally ill person, and you should pay no attention to them, which I think is kind of a narrow-minded point of view. But
Yeah.
nevertheless, I mean, but you should be cautious, certainly. All right, you kind of seen the source that it's coming from, but it just upholds such a. The closest thing I can compare it to is that I don't know. I kind of suspect that you're a David Lynch fan,
Yes.
maybe. Okay, so the whole sort of world. Anybody who's seen Twin Peaks, and anybody who's seen Mulholland Drive,
Mulholland Drive, my favorite. Yeah.
any of his. I mean, see, that's the thing. You watch that movie, and the whole
Hmm.
point is like, what the hell? What is this? Does
Yeah.
this connect with that? Okay, who's the cowboy?
Yeah. What's going on here? What's the blue box? What,
Wasn't
you know?
he this person? But that's again the way that you often encounter things, is that it just seems to make no particular sense,
Right.
and
Until it does.
until it does, until suddenly the kind of realization sets in. So yeah, Downard's world is this world that operates very much like a David Lynch movie,
Mm.
in which there
Yes.
are these kind of dark forces continually moving in the background and
Hmm.
manipulating people. And
Which
it's
is, I want to throw in there, which is, in my experience, growing up around this, that's very Southern United States in its nature, the undercurrent of because the Southern society, particularly the middle class and above, they're very guarded of their secrets. They're very guarded with the undercurrent, but they're very in touch with it.
yeah, you learn how to keep your mouth shut, but there are only
Hmm.
certain things that you. Well, an interesting thing about it to me is that he was born in Ardmore, Oklahoma, which
Hmm.
is down at and the reason I recognize that is that's also the same place my mom is from.
Oh,
And in fact, I figured out
synchronicity.
that they must have that she was 2 years younger than he was, and therefore they must actually have they could
Oh,
have passed each
wow.
other in the street. I mean, my mom lived on
Wow.
a farm outside of town, but that's where they would go. So at some point, conceivably in their childhood, they could have met. So I just that was it was interesting.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it presents this really kind of nightmarish view, of American history, of America, of reality in general. I think that gives it a kind of morbid fascination to it, but I don't. It's sort of, again, Dowden makes this big thing about place names. That place names always have particular key
Yes.
meanings, and you can kind
Yeah.
of read the tea leaves to something.
Hmm.
And while he probably makes it, in some cases, it's difficult to figure out what he's talking about, because it's
Right.
like he gets into this kind of Robin Williams thing,
A little
if you
bit.
remember.
Yeah.
Robin
Good
Williams was
point.
on. He would suddenly
Yeah.
begin improvising at this point. It
Hmm.
was one of those things that could never be duplicated again. Even he wasn't clear what he was doing, but it was just
Hmm.
stuff that was just flowing out of him. And sometimes you get the idea this is what's happening with Downard. But he's one of the cases I would argue he's not wrong that place names can and do have significance.
Yes.
I mean, one of the things to keep in mind is that something was apparently somebody decided to give the name of something to it in the first place. And that
Right.
could be for a very mundane reason. It could be named after the person. It could be, it could be Crooked Mountain because, well, it's crooked. Okay. It's like Mount Arrowhead, there's an arrowhead.
Yeah.
So
It.
that's what we'll call it. But in other cases, the reason for naming could be more complicated. It would be more something about some kind of even sort of feeling that you have about the place.
Yeah.
Like Peaceful Glade.
Hmm.
It's a glade, but peaceful is a feeling that it
Hmm.
evoked to.
True.
So yeah, so Downard's not wrong about that. It's not insane to simply argue that place names can be significant, and that the staging, the manufacturing of events the creation of, let's say, some sort of ritual at a particular place at a particular time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if nothing else, it has significance to the people who are doing it.
Right. Of
And if the
course.
people who are doing it are important and powerful, or believe they
Mm-hmm.
are important and powerful,
Yeah.
then that can have repercussions.
Yes, it can. Yes, it can, because their power alone can manifest things that were merely suggested by the naming of those places. Well, now, on Downard, and you mentioned him being institutionalized a couple of times. Did did he do most of his profound or interesting work that we talk about that he's known for before or after these hospitalizations?
It appears after. He doesn't seem to have written anything until the 1970s.
Okay.
So if you're going through public records, if you're going through newspapers, he pretty much drops off the radar after 1955.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because there are things about him. Downard was a kind of mad scientist.
Yeah.
He was a doctor of naturopathy. He developed he did experiments in ultrasonics, and also in high and low frequency. He believed he had found ways to make plants grow faster. He even came up with something he believed could help the military develop a better rocket fuel. This is around 1946, 1947. So
Whoa!
here's a story I'll tell you that is okay. One of the things that came across fairly recently, and you'll like this because it involves the Air Force.
Okay, cool.
Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and James Shelby Downard. All
Oh
tied
wow!
up.
Okay, yeah.
All right,
This
so he splits up with his wife. He'd been variously some sort of doctor, bacteriologist. He leaves Florida in 1945. He goes to Oklahoma City, and he becomes part of a thing called the Klassen Clinic. He becomes a doctor of naturopathy at the Klassen Clinic,
Okay.
which was a private hospital that basically treated alcoholism and drug addiction and nervous problems in women.
Okay. Yeah.
So one of those kind of private hospitals.
Yeah. The catch-all.
But it's right after, World War II is just, so this is like December of 1945. And so there's this whole ad in Oklahoma City saying, that Dr. Downard is joining us and he's going to head up our new psychosomatic department. And he's an electroencephalographer.
Okay.
Which means that he places electrodes on people's heads.
Sure.
And sends electric currents through their brain. But one of the things that they're now treating, in addition to drug and alcohol addiction and menopausal problems, we're now going to deal with battle fatigue.
Yes.
A lot of guys get, what is now very clearly post-traumatic stress disorder,
Yeah.
what was then called battle fatigue. So, this is the interesting thing. Downard later on will basically argue that when he was hospitalized, he admits to being hospitalized and to being sort of forcibly experimented on and having implants placed in his body and having, electrical current shot through his brain. Now, the interesting thing is that as an electroencephalographer in the psychosomatic department of the Klassen Clinic, that's exactly what he was doing to other people.
So
means that at least he kind of knows what he was talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
That they wired me up. Well, that's what he was doing. He was a guy that wired people up.
Yeah.
So he goes, he's only there for a while. He then shows up in Phoenix, Arizona. And he joins forces for reasons I haven't been able to figure with an Air Force flight officer. Okay. And they team up and they supposedly begin working on these different devices. So they're coming up with inventions. And this will all eventually lead to this thing called the ultrason, which uses ultrasonic sound to do everything.
Yeah.
To make your plants grow better. But they're developing all kinds of stuff. He goes back to Florida for a while. Then he goes back. Then he comes back he's back in Phoenix in the late 40s. So this is like 47, 40. And there are articles in the newspaper where he's giving about his inventions.
Okay.
And one of them he'll later mention is that, yeah, I came up with all of this stuff and I was really sure that this was going to be of real importance to the Air Force. So I wrote up all the notes that I had and I sent them to the Air Force. And he showed the reporter a letter from the Air Force acknowledging your materials. And then later he was sort of interested in what happened to them. They go, oh, well, we were sending them to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and they got lost. We don't know where they are. They're just gone. Sorry. So he's working on some sort of secret stuff.
Yeah.
He's going to give to the Air Force, and somewhere between Phoenix and Wright-Patterson, it gets lost. Then what eventually happens to him? Well, this is where you read a little newspaper article from December 1950, maybe a year down the road, that three guys tried to escape from the Arizona State Mental Hospital, one of them being a J.S. Downard. Yep, it's him.
Oh, boy.
He never gives the name of the place, but in the lost writings that the one that just came out, he actually kind of obliquely refers to this. I mean, he refers to people escaping from a mental institution. And so anyway, that was one occasion when he was there. But he's out at least within a couple of years, because then he goes to Alabama, where he teams up with a chiropractor and he becomes a specialist in ultrasonic treatments.
Okay.
So you can go to the chiropractor in Montgomery and he'll, crack your spine, and then you'll go in and see Dr. Downard, who will wire you up.
Or give you physical. Now, I'm assuming that this is the same ultrasonics that led to its legitimized use in physical therapy, right?
Yeah, there is. I mean, that's it. I mean, he's not imagining ultrasonics. It's a real thing. And apparently it actually can be used to mix paint better. So who knew? Well,
here's an interesting little tidbit you'll get some amusement out of. The guy who first told me about Van Tassel's Integratron, okay? I was part-time working as a physical therapy aide, and he was the doctor in charge of physical therapy at this particular hospital. And he's the one that told me about the Integratron. And the Integratron, of course, has a pedigree with all this stuff, the the homeopathy and all the natural cures and all the stuff that Downard's into. So, and here was a guy, and he had the ultrasound machines at the hospital, and he was the guy that would, provide the physical therapy, this guy who sent me out there, with ultrasound. So that's how I know about ultrasound. Now, something that you mentioned a couple of minutes ago that I had a question about. At one point, Downard dabbles in rocket fuel ideas, and you told me this was the late 40s. Did he ever cross paths with Jack Parsons, I wonder?
Jack Parsons, there you go. Well, I can't put him, all you can say is that here are two people who are sort of, from a different angles, dealing with the same sort of thing.
Right.
Now, the thing about Parsons is that, at least during the during the war years, he actually got fairly close to people in the military. Like, they would fly him back to D.C. and he would get to see all of it, and they would talk to him about various classified projects, and which makes him interesting to all kinds of people.
Yeah. You mentioned how Downard's ideas somewhere between what was it? You said Phoenix and Wright-Pat got lost, right? Yeah. I'll tell you, they probably got lost in the hands of the Air Force intel units at either Randolph or Kelly in Texas, and lost. It's like, ooh, look at this! Send this to the labs right now.
Well, now, here's the thing that kind of, did he really say, the whole thing is that, he told a reporter he sent this. Well, he also tells a reporter that he wrote to former Vice President Henry Wallace. Henry Wallace had been a kind of career cabinet member in the FDR administration.
Yes.
And Wallace in this period, this again is like in late 45. Actually, it's in
The,
40s.
is this the Dear Guru letter era of Wallace's
Yeah,
life?
well, no, that's coming up. So yes, he had a whole guru phase. So but the reason he writes to Wallace is that he's Wallace is very interested. His background is in agronomy, is in agriculture,
Uh-huh.
and so Wallace, on his own sort of private farm, was experimenting with radioactive materials to try to see if you can give a little bit of radium to plants and can they grow. You
Hmm.
know, can we produce a bigger tomato or can we produce a giant carnivorous plant? Whatever it will be. What kind of horrific mutations can we create? So he knew that Wallace was interested in anything dealing with agriculture. So he basically sent him materials going, this is what my ultrasonic experiments can do with plant growth. They can actually stimulate plants, and there's a whole, and we can also influence the weather with this as well.
Okay.
You see how all of this just sort of, I mean, flows into one thing or you scratch one little part of it and there's another layer underneath. So yeah,
Yeah.
weather modification, mutation of organic material. Well, did he actually write to Wallace? He did, because in Wallace's papers at the University of Iowa is Downard's letter, which Wallace filed away.
Hmm.
But an interesting thing in it is you have to look at it at the top of that letter in Wallace's handwriting is the name Boris Pregel. And Boris Pregel was he and his brother, Alexander Pregel, owned a thing which was something like the Canadian Uranium and Radium Company.
Okay.
And they basically produced all of the uranium, all of the radioactive material. They produced all of the stuff used by the Manhattan Project. When you're thinking about it, you're down in New Mexico and you go, well, we're going to make an atom bomb. I guess we need some uranium. Who has some? Oh, the Pregel brothers do. They're the only source in the entire Western world. That's where it came from. And these were the guys who had been giving Henry Wallace radioactive materials to use on his plants in his home terrarium.
Okay.
He was doing. But then the question is, why on Downard's letter did Wallace write Pregel's name? Did he forward Downard's stuff onto him? What? I mean, it is simply a question mark. But what it shows is that yes, he really did write to. He wrote to Wallace exactly what it says he wrote to him about,
Hmm.
and and Wallace got the letter. We don't know whether he ever answered it. That would be on Downard's end of it. So that's one of the things that strengthens the possibility is that when he said, I also sent materials to the Air Force, you have to come in. Is he more or likely to be telling the truth about this?
Yeah.
And you have to argue he's more than likely telling the truth because it's something told in the same context as something you can demonstrate.
Yeah.
Um,
Boy, if I had only known this in the late 90s when I was at Wright-Patterson, the things I would have looked for in the vault. It's James Shelby Downard. Okay, let's find that letter.
but you can get, I mean, here's the flip side of the coin, though, is that there's an incident that he describes in Carnivals of Life and Death of where it's one of his typical sort of set piece things where somebody goes, oh, I need you to go by my family's tomb and I need you to go in. I'm going to pay you to pick up a bunch of grave goods. They're all stored inside the tomb. Yeah, this is one of these, like Dracula movie things where everybody's buried in a casket sitting in a tomb. And apparently you just use it as extra storage space. I mean, why not?
Sure.
So I want you to go in and pick up this space. So he goes in, and after narrowly avoiding death by the trap door, he goes in and he finds mysterious books that have his name on them, but he does they're about stuff he's never heard of.
Right.
But then there's also this thing called the Dayton Witch, which is apparently some sort of early computer. And so he talks about finding this in a tomb in a graveyard. Sort of around Fort Thomas, Kentucky, just south of Cincinnati. Well, in the other materials, he tells the same story, but now the Dayton Witch in the book are in a barn. Okay, they're no longer in the cemetery in the tomb.
Oh,
they're now
okay.
in a barn.
Yeah.
So, elements of the story are consistent, but he's now told two different versions of the story. And I don't think it's that he found two different sets of books and two different mysterious computer-like instruments, because you'd kind of point that out if you'd seen it before, but that rather he's got this story, but it's coming out in two different ways. So which is the more accurate version, or either of them?
Yeah.
So, but this is, this is what keeps it interesting.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It also begs the question: what you wonder? His reach and his dabblings were in so many varied areas. Was there a unified thread that would make sense of all these apparently, different directions, and what would that unified thread have been? And for my experience tells me, for me, the unifying thread tends to be that Hecate thread, and that's all the symbology, all the things like that. Did he have the one thread that wove him through all these others? That's what I wonder.
I think Hecate comes up. He goes through. He has this one thing, which is again in the newer material, about the significance of various sort of Grecian gods and goddesses and how their names are applied. Whenever you find those applied, the whole reason why the city of Memphis is called Memphis is a reference to the Memphis of ancient Egypt.
Sure,
and that's why it was given that name. It wasn't like they picked that. Well, probably not, but. They could have, but because people were attributing some sort of significance to it. I think there's a spot in his life where I can sort of, in looking through the materials, where things seem to take a change. So if you sort of look at, leaving aside all the sort of fantastic things he says happened about him, that, he seems to go, he like dropped out of 3 colleges. Okay, that's something. I mean, keep in mind, most people in the 30s never went to college, so that will tell you the sort of strata he's coming from. Seems to have basically squandered a lot of opportunities that he had. Ends up marrying this young model, originally from Memphis, but marries her in Texas in 36 after pretty much a kind of whirlwind. From the time he arrived there between the time they got married is a matter of months. So it was not a long romance.
Right.
And then so much about that marriage, his relationship, this seems to have been his whole introduction. And so according to him, she was this kind of programmed sorceress sex pot. She was this kind of high priestess,
right,
of this hidden world, of this hidden cult.
Right.
He gradually, and he refers to her feeding him what he calls about abulic drugs, drugs that she would administer him that would reduce his will or his ability to respond. His whole thrust in this baby is that he believed that his actual memory had been erased or stolen from him. When he had been institutionalized, he believed that he had been wired up and that his memories had been changed. Does that ring any bells?
Yeah. Can you say Ewan Cameron and MK Ultra? False narrative. Oh boy. Psychic driving.
Your dad actually have some experience about that, right?
I suspect that. Absolutely. I suspect that. And I was told as much by, someone who would have known.
Well, see, all it means is here in James Shelby Downard, crazy guy, you've got somebody saying something you see kind of familiar.
Yeah.
So he was subjected to psychological manipulation, physical and otherwise, and those took away his real memories and gave him false ones. And so much of what he's doing, a lot of this sort of craziness, or maybe it is craziness, was his effort to kind of, through an application of will, to recover his true memories.
Yeah.
And even he seems to admit that probably at some point that what he's getting probably it isn't really what happened, but it's the closest that his mind can reconstruct to what happened.
I like that. Yeah. That's wow. The guy, he's just such a grab bag of you could just, go on endlessly, I think, trying to figure him out. But this, I think, is a good time for us to, you up for a few questions from the live chat?
Sure.
Okay, now, folks, we're having a little bit of a technical glitch today, and so I'm the one doing the pulling questions up. So I'm going to do the best I can, and remember, please put them in all capital letters so that I can see that you have a question, and I'll do the best I can. So I will go to the live chat and look for those in all caps. And as soon as they start popping up here, I'll bring one in. Let me see what we got going here. This is interesting. Seeing. Okay. And, if everybody's just stunned, then, we don't have to.
Hopefully not.
What's interesting, another guy who told a fascinating tale that had been institutionalized was Richard Shaver, of course. You've heard of him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he would claim to hear the voices when he was he was a machinist, and he would hear voices and strange things. Excuse me, just a moment. So, Shaver, he told some pretty wild tales, and but with Downard, see, I either didn't know or I didn't remember the little details that you shared with us, that might have put him in Jack Parsons circles. It looks like we have. Let me get the. Okay, Todd Wood. And I got to make this big again so I can see it.
Hello, Todd.
Yeah, Todd, who I've written a couple of things with, and he does monthly. He does a series here what we call California. He says, "Great show. I feel like I've learned a lot. Thank you so much, Mr. Spence." That's Dr. Spence. And could there be a Downard connection to Jolyon West with the psychotronics type of stuff, do you think?
Yeah. There could be. That's not saying that there is, but yes, you've noticed the similarity, which is just something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Maybe Downard was not I don't think he was the first to come along to say that, you can stick electrodes in people's brains and make them do things. You can implant memories. You can erase memories. So, and in that sense, what essentially Downard claims or seems to claim, I have to say seems, happened to him is not exceptional. You could the same claims have been made elsewhere, and it is fully within the realm of plausibility and technology. Yeah, you can do that. That's what MK Ultra was all about.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, and it's interesting that Downard's story really emerges during that era when MK Ultra has been developed here. You can't ignore that, like you brought up with his story that through medicinals, so to speak, he was being given the suspected new memories. Maybe he's seeing that through the spectrum of the false narrative, and he's equating it with this wife that he had, when actually it was done to him while he was institutionalized, right? I think you were going there, right?
Well, yeah, the longer he seems, he goes back and he's partners with this chiropractor in Alabama. But then in 1955, Downard, who had been publishing fairly regular letters to the editor and the local newspaper attacking the quackeries of the medical profession, he just goes silent. And he you know, and in the next place he apparently pops up is back in Florida in the early 1970s when he's living in a trailer and he's hanging out with guys like William Grimstead and Michael Hoffman and others, and where Parfrey will pick up his trail. So a question becomes, what was he doing between 1955 and, you know, at least the 10 years that followed that? Well, that's where the Tennessee Western State Mental Hospital, or Bolivar Hospital, comes into play, because he was there next, and apparently for a longer period of time. Not sure how long. Again, in his in the newer materials, Downard does a lot of talking about Bolivar Hospital, and the fellow who directed it never directly places himself in it. One of the things I found about Downard, by comparing where he was with what he writes about, he'll sometimes write about a place and events happening there, and he was actually there at the time, but he never tells you that. It's like he's talking about something else. Right. So early on, he'll talk about, he talked about a kind of a transition in his life. He marries this gal in 1936. By 1940, they're running a little hotel, a thing called the Sugarloaf Inn, north of Key West, Florida, where he has her. Later, he claims she's involved in all kinds of sex magic rites everywhere, and he talks about her to Miami and Key. And yeah, they live right between Miami and Key West, but they're running this kind of little inn liquor store. And then in 1940, he leaves, he goes to St. Louis, Missouri, and he enrolls in the Gradwall Medical Technology School. It was a real place. It was very credible. I can't remember his first name, but Dr. Gradwall, Gradwahl, was considered one of the pioneers in forensics, forensic pathology. And Downard went there to study, but it trained things like radiologists and people who worked with medical equipment. And that's where Downard went in 1940. His wife did not go with him, so they seem to have split up for a while. And that's where you kind of see two things going on. There seems to be a kind of breakdown in the marriage. That's what he seems to describe, and her sort of random secro-mystic infidelity that he talks about elsewhere. I mean, what is that? Some sort of, there was something going on. And then he decides he wants to become a medical technician. This from a guy who'd shown no interest in this before that I can see. Right. And then next he's in the Army he shows up as an X-ray technician, 1942. He's at he's working at an Army hospital at Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, and he is an X-ray tech. But the following year, 1943, with World War II still going on, he's apparently out of the Army, and he's back in Florida, and he's running his naturopathic clinic, and he's claiming to be a bacteriologist. All right. Then later, this is the same guy who will bill himself as an electroencephalographer and a specialist in psychosomatic diseases. But he actually does have technical training. I mean, at the Gradwall Institute, he would have received some of the best technical medical technology at the time. And the Army employed an X-ray technician, which doesn't mean all that much, but somebody did. So he has some kind of actual grounding in this stuff. And I don't think, again, it's later on in the 70s when he seems to be trying to put all these pieces back together. There's, let me come back to something you mentioned before about a connection between he and Parsons. And it just occurred to me that there's another one. Palomar Observatory. All right, how is there a connection between the Palomar Observatory? It's kind of, you know where it is. It's San Diego, up in the hills for the California uninitiated. It's up in that area. And it was built in the middle of the 1930s. It was built in 1936. And it was a couple of things coming in. The OTO, the sort of Crowley-esque group that Parsons was later closely and even headed for a while,
Yeah.
At some point in the 30s, they are supposed to have consecrated a temple on Mount Palomar.
Oh.
That would have been at about the time that the telescope, that the observatory was first built there. So sometimes people will tell you that the observatory didn't exist until I think like 46. Well,
Right.
the formal facility didn't, but the telescope, the 200-inch telescope, was placed there in 1936. So that's when the observatory was first placed there by what was then the Guggenheim, what would become Caltech,
Yeah.
aeronautic laboratory.
Mm-hmm.
The whole thing that Parsons is connected to. So Parsons is connected to Caltech, the Guggenheims. They're connected to Mount Palomar, where they build the OTO. And this is before Crowley comes into a supposedly a consecrated temple. Parsons later on is supposed to have officiated at ceremonies there. So it raises an interesting question. Was the temple someplace other than the observatory, or was the temple, in fact, the observatory?
That's very Lovecraftian. You know,
Well,
particularly if you want to know if the stars are in the right alignment, to paraphrase his work.
So Downard also goes into all of this stuff about Sirius. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, the ultimate weirdness in Downard, which I've never seen actually from his lips, so to speak, but other people
Right.
saying it, is that why are all the sorcerous masons doing these things? Why are they carrying out these rituals? What are they preparing us for? They're preparing us for an alien takeover, because you knew ETs had to show up in this some way or another.
Of course. Why not?
So yeah, and they're going to come from Sirius, and they have rituals. So Downer describes a ritual that takes place at an observatory, in which the cultists focus the giant telescope on Sirius or some other heavenly body, and then bask in its rays. Okay, they focus it, which I guess kind of. So you focus Sirius, and then they bask in its rays and perform their rituals. So, and then Downer mentions that his wife, the so-called Great Horde, who's now living out in San Diego, running a hotel, is that he talks about her, being driven by the FBI up to Palomar to lead unholy sex rituals to help consecrate the Syrian rituals.
Yes.
So is that a whole, I don't know, is the observatory used by different occult groups on alternating weekends?
Well, now, yeah, definitely, since I live not too far up the road, I'm going to be checking out. I'm going to be looking a little deeper into Palomar. This is very intriguing.
Is it the same thing?
Yeah.
Is this? But you have these. You have Downard talking about weird rituals taking place at Palomar, and then there really was this group that supposedly carried out weird rituals at Palomar. And then the even weirder stuff about, focusing light from Sirius, and I don't know.
Well, you've got the history down there. There's Lomaland, which, I'm sure you've heard of, Catherine Tingley and all that stuff down at Point Loma. So, San Diego in North County, it's called, which is closer to Palomar. It's got... That area has had a long history with, the spiritualist and the anthroposophy movement and all of that stuff connected. So, it's very possible that Palomar itself could indeed, the observatory could be on the site of a former temple or the temple itself. And I'll definitely look into that. We got time for one more question, and that's coming from Philomath 360. Could the psychotronic equipment be misused hermetic technology used to develop, I guess, expand, parts of the mind or human consciousness? I guess, well, that would be the general question,
It could be anything.
Yeah.
It's not to say it is. It's not to... That's not a conclusion that I would come to. But I would entertain it as a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
Again, Downard knew something in terms of medical technology. He was at least able to, con somebody into having him head up a psychosomatic department and wire things to people's heads. Yeah, that takes a certain amount of confidence.
Yeah, yeah.
But
particularly when they know his medical history.
Yeah, it does touch upon the thing, though. It's like anything else. Very often, a certain amount of something is good for you, but beyond that, it's bad for you. So, I mean, there's almost nothing. There's no medicine that you take that at a certain dose, probably wouldn't kill you.
Sure, everything in moderation.
Doses, poison in small doses can achieve beneficial things. That's just basic alchemy.
Oh yeah, sure. Than
that.
Sure. Well,
yeah.
I think we're at the end of our time here today, even though we could obviously go on and on. So I'm going to have you back, Rick, in the not too distant future. If
I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, this has been great. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you, and if there's a book or anything out there that you want to tell them where to get that.
Well, I guess the main thing I would pitch now is the new series at Wondrium Great Courses, which is Secrets of the Occult. If you're a well-versed occultist, you may find much of it mundane, but I would probably suggest there would be some things in there that would either shock or horrify or offend you. So therefore you should take a look at. It's one of those things that I approach from, I am neither trying to promote, I don't really have the time to get involved in kind of debunking things. All right.
Right.
If it's debunkable, what's the point?
Yeah.
If it's debatable, then let's debate it in that case. But yeah, it discusses everything from the occult basis of your Christmas tree ritual. There you go. That would be a part of it. There's a whole episode devoted to the others. Fairies, jinn, those things that kind of might be out there messing with us. But again, we're not. Did I imagine that, or something actually going on? But also, one of the themes I try to bring through is occultism simply is hidden. It's the idea that there is a hidden reality which we can tap into through doing these various things, like rituals, etc. I try to define things. A ritual is simply a series of actions performed in a specific sequence to achieve a particular effect. Once you keep that in mind, you'll notice that things like plays, movies, and sporting events are rituals.
Yes.
Anything which is a set of actions performed in a particular sequence to achieve a result or impact. Every opera, every musical performance, every piece of music you have ever listened to is all a kind of ritual that you can do. So the idea is that the occult is all around us. It's really not all that hidden. It affects us in everyday lives. And then the idea of the central concept of using will to influence reality. Can you do that? I guess you got to try. Why not?
Sure. Got to do something while we're here, right? Well, tell you, thanks again for being here. Really appreciate it. And this has been a fascinating talk. I'm telling you, I think the reason we had very few questions is, we got a high number watching, and I think they were all mesmerized by this information, and they're certainly going to run out and go out and check out the Dr. Spence's Wondrium series and the Secrets of the Occult, and check out his books too. You'll find those at Amazon.
You can find those on Amazon, and you can find any contact information for me. You still got I'm retired from the University of Idaho, but that will have contact information. If you have something friendly and constructive to say, I'm always glad to hear from people. If you want to email me and call me names and give me shit, then you can just not do that. All right.
I like that. Yeah, just pass on that. We'll skip to the next thing. So, well, again, thank you, and I definitely am going to have you back.
All right. Well, thank you. I'll be happy to do that. All right.
So, folks, thanks. I think this was really a good one. This was a good discussion. And remember, Tuesday night from 9 p.m. to midnight PST, I'm at the Independent Broadcast Network for Lost Horizons, my radio show. Go to lostcontinentlibrary.com for the books and links to all the other stuff. And I will see you all again next week.